is happening in me. I'm gonna remember you, Silver Lady. So don't you worry.
You'll find her. You'll find her someday.
Hands off that dial. Business is about to get a whole lot nerdier. You're tuned in to FounderQuest.
Somebody tweeted a while back and somebody referenced us and said that we should talk about this. You should run your company like you're going to sell it. So then I thought, well, maybe we could talk about sort of acquisitions in general, maybe weave it back and forth. So Honeybadger has had a couple of fairly serious acquisition talks, none ongoing right now, none that panned out, obviously. We're not going to name names because I think it might be illegal for us to, because we signed stuff. The first one was with a private equity firm that specialized in sort of smaller companies and taking these companies built by developers and then bringing in business people and figuring out how to grow them. And then we had another acquisition talk with a pretty well-known company in the developer space. And that would have been more of it would have been kind of a strategic thing because they were kind of trying to bring something to market that was very similar to what we did. And sort of both of those eventually fell through because we just couldn't really come to terms. But I think we learned a lot while we were pursuing these, because starting out, like, I knew about acquisitions, like what pretty much I imagine anybody knows about acquisition is like, okay, you sell a company, you make a ton of money, and that's like your happy ending. But it's really a lot more complex than that. It's really a lot, like, unless you happen to win the lottery, it's not necessarily like this huge, you're going to be rich and set for the rest of your life event. Yeah. So I don't know. Like, what do you guys think?
I think that last statement is key. Like, our business has grown steadily, but not like exponentially, right? So if you're sitting on a rocket ship, I think, yeah, you could probably have one of those acquisition events where you're set for the rest of your life, because they're buying based on the future value of the company, right? They're not just based on what you've done so far. They're based on what they think you could do with them combined with you, right? So if you have had this like exponential growth event, or if you can show that happening with their added resources to yours, then you could probably pull that off. But in our case, that wasn't really the scenario, right? We were growing steadily. The acquirers were interested in us because they knew that it was a reasonable business that could continue to grow, but not that it was expecting like this phenomenal growth. So yeah, so in our case, those numbers weren't like going to be crazy high numbers, but they were still nice numbers,
I feel like this is kind of a theme in our podcast, in that like the way that most people probably think about acquisitions is focused on the sort of VC model of startups and fundings and acquisitions. And in a lot of our episodes, we're like, okay, this is the VC way of doing things, but that's not like the way for everybody. The sort of VC acquisition model that everybody has in their head is, okay, you start this company, your company has a ton of growth, and it targets some market that is adjacent to a big company. And that big company doesn't have their eye on this sort of little market. Maybe they don't realize how much opportunity is there. But then this little plucky startup comes and exploits that, gets crazy growth. And now you have this little company who is kind of edging in on the territory of a bigger company. And so the big company buys the little company in order to get access to that market. I mean, I think that's probably the most common approach. I mean, sometimes there are sometimes people buy, the bigger company buys you because you've developed some crazy like new technology that they couldn't develop on their own. I think those are the two situations in which you have this like really big possible like monetary outcome. I mean, just listening to those stories, like that's kind of that you kind of see that, well, in order to do that, you have to have this crazy amount of growth to the point where a big company with that's worth $1 billion or more. Actually, when I was sort of getting to know about investing, I learned that like a company worth $1 billion is a relatively small company for like a public company. So you have to get the attention of one of these sort of bigger companies, and you're not really going to do that unless you have a lot of growth, or you have a whole bunch of customers that they really want access to, or you've got to have something that they want. And yeah, we're just not really on that train, right?
Yeah, not at that scale. I think one thing to keep in mind is, the motivation for an acquirer is to, like you said, bring in some new technology or bring in this innovative team or have access to a market that you have found a way to have access to. And backing up from that, why do they care about these things? Because they want to increase their own revenue, right? They want to move the needle on their own business, right? So if you're talking to a $100 billion company and, your revenues are in the $10 million range, right? Well, okay, that's interesting, but that's not really going to move the needle for that $100 billion company, right? So they're looking for much bigger things. So
unless they can like leverage something that you have to make a lot more money than you're currently making, right? Because I don't think Microsoft really cares about how much money GitHub was bringing in. Like, I mean, I'm sure they do to some degree, but that's not why Microsoft bought GitHub, because they want to own open source, right? Yeah,
they want access to that market, right? Those developers who have a goodwill feeling towards GitHub. Yeah, so in our case, we don't have this huge market that we've tapped into. We have a respectably sized market, and we don't have this rocket ship growth. So we're not going to be having necessarily Microsoft come knocking on the door saying, "Hey, we want to throw hundreds of millions of dollars in your lap."
Speaking of GitHub has made a number of acquisitions recently, all seeming to relate to like GitHub related tools that people had built to do like specific things that GitHub didn't do. And
I've noticed that. Who have they bought?
They bought Dependabot, which is a automated dependency service. So like if you've got like outdated npm, like if your node packages are outdated or something in your project, it'll monitor that, and then it'll actually like send pull requests to update your dependencies. We use it at Honeybadger, and it's pretty cool. So they pulled that in, and they already actually like rolled that into GitHub. So GitHub is now doing that as a feature of the core platform. And then the other one was pull reminders. Is that?
Yeah, it started just as pull reminders, but they've actually added a few more things. So now I think it's called Pull Panda.
Yeah. And so they did the same thing recently. They just announced that they were being acquired by GitHub. But it seems like GitHub's doing a round of consolidation for some of those features. And instead of building, they're just bringing those apps in.
How much money do you think they would pay for something like that?
Whatever it took the founders to join the guy.
Yeah.
Because in that case, like for Pull Panda, that was a very small team, right? They're probably a similar size to us, right? So probably, the two factors that happen a lot in these kind of smaller acquisitions is like what, I guess it's sometimes called an acqui-hire, where if they're pre-revenue or the revenue is very small, they say, okay, well, there's no real valuation based on how much money you're bringing in, because that's not going to make a difference to the acquiring company. But we want your team badly enough that we're willing to pay a premium over market rates for hiring you. So basically, it's a super big, hiring bonus, right? An acqui-hire. And as you add more revenue, though, and I have no idea where Pull Panda is on revenue, but as you get into the millions of revenue or maybe even hundreds of thousands, right? That's worth something to a certain size of acquirer, right? And so then the money is probably based on the multiple of the revenue more than getting a team. Maybe it's a combination of the two.
Because if GitHub really wanted to add dependency checking, like they could just build that themselves and release it for free, and then that would make Dependabot just completely go out of business.
Which they did with Gymnasium, right? So GitHub built the security thing a while back, a couple years ago, and basically took the rug out from under Gymnasium, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they must have done some sort of calculation where it's just like, hiring these people is worth something to us, and sort of bringing in this existing code base is just worth it to have it. It's sort of almost like a convenience thing.
Well, you got to build up like an internal team. If you're going to build that feature, you're going to like create an internal team and have them go and, they're going to explore that domain and build it. And if you can just hire someone that's already done that and pull it in, and they basically become that team moving forward, like, I mean, that
it saves time.
It's not that they couldn't do it the other way, but it's just more like you said, convenient.
It sort of illustrates like the two different scales of acquisitions. You have the scale of acquisition where it's like Microsoft buys GitHub for like $1 billion or something, and then all these smaller players are getting bought out for I would be surprised if it's over $10 million. Like probably a couple million. Like most acqui-hires are
like $1 million per head.
$1
what
million
are
a head
the
or something.
multiples are lower on acqui-hires, right?
I mean, with acqui-hires, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a multiple, I don't think, right? So when we talk about multiples, let's explain this. We're talking about multiples of revenue, right? So that seems to be a pretty normal way of thinking about value for tech companies that are being sold. And it's a little different than if you were like buying a dry cleaners, right? If you're buying like a dry cleaners or some very stodgy business, probably what you would do is you'd go through the books very carefully. You'd figure out how much profit they're making, and then you'd buy it based on some sort of multiple on profit. But with tech companies, it's often pretty normal to buy based off of a multiple of revenue. The multiple that you're going to get paid is going to depend on why they're buying you, right? Like, so if they're buying you for the cash flow that your company generates, then they're going to pay a certain amount. If they're buying you based on the fact that, well, they think that they can take your business and make it like 100 times bigger, then you're going to get a much higher multiple. So what would be what's like on the low end of like?
So a starting point that often comes up in our world is 36 times that monthly revenue, right? The free cash flow, I guess. Not take out the whatever the founder is being paid, because presumably, assuming someone takes over the whole business, that founder goes away happily into the sunset with their cash, right? So you can back that money out, but basically the starting point to talks is typically around 36 times that monthly number.
Okay. So 3 times yearly revenue. And that's like that's low end, right?
There are a bunch of factors, again, the growth
like
and so on.
Was probably paid much more than that.
So there, like I said, there are other factors like growth and, market size and so on. But yeah,
I feel like lately I've heard people say that that's pretty low though. Like if you're going to go sell your company, like don't sell it for 3x. Unless,
that's just if you really want to sell
like
it.
You want out. If you want out or something, sell it for 3x. But like, yeah,
I've heard some people recently talking about 5x is a more reasonable starting point. But I think even before you get to the point of like, well, how much am I willing to take? You think about, am I willing to sell at all? You mentioned, Star, that we had a couple of opportunities. And I remember the first one we talked about quite a bit when we had that first offer, because that was new to us, right? Like, oh, that's really interesting. Let's spend some time and really thinking about this. And
it's kind of flattering.
Yeah, it is. It definitely feels.
It's like, oh, they like us.
Yeah, totally.
They really like us. Wow, we're real. We're doing it.
I remember we spent a lot of time talking about it amongst the three of us. Like, oh, is this something that we really want to pursue? And we met with them, and it was great. And but what really came down to was, as I recall, anyway, you can correct me if I'm remembering this incorrectly, but was like we hadn't been at it long enough, and we felt like we wanted to see if we could do it. Like if we wanted to see if we could make this successful business, and we weren't quite willing to exit that way yet.
Well, and the terms like it was closer, a little bit closer. It was kind of between an acqui-hire and like, I guess, hiring for the business, but it wouldn't have been like a walk away acquisition.
Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this because this is another sort of thing people think about is you sell the company and you just kind of leave, right?
Yeah, that doesn't happen usually.
I think it's pretty rare to sell a company and they just hand you a pile of cash and then you turn over the keys and you leave. Instead, like there's usually terms, right? Because they want to make sure that they're getting something that's actually valuable. They want to make sure that the business doesn't fail when you leave like immediately. And so like, what are some normal terms for acquisitions for tech companies like ours?
That's pretty standard to have the founder or founders be around for 2 years after an acquisition. And so a lot of the compensation that comes is tied to that 2-year threshold. So yes, once you've vested all of your time at 2 years, then you get, whatever the, part of it. So you get some percentage up front and then some percentage later when you complete that term. I've seen that as short as 3 months, 6 months, but typically it's 2 years.
I don't know. I've always been like anxious about the thought of working somewhere for 2 years after selling the company because you really have to trust that everybody is working in good faith. Everybody is really sort of above board, because I don't know. I'm just thinking like of all the things people could try and do in 2 years to get you to quit, which is like people, it's like, okay, I got to be more trusting, but that's where my mind goes, right? Because I'm like the engineer. I got to think of the case where everything breaks.
Well, yeah, totally. And that's why, we say the 5X, the 3X, that's the starting point, right? Because there are all these factors like, okay, so what is the vesting schedule for this, right? If you want me to be around for 2 years or 4 years, well, then you got to pay me more. You got to promise more than if I just had all this cash in hand, 100% up front today, right? And I could walk away tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so those are terms that affect what that price looks like.
Yeah. And for a business like ours, I feel like if we ever do sell, like we have to price in just the annoyance of having to go back to work for somebody else.
Totally.
Because if you sell your business to somebody and then you stay for 2 years, like you're an employee.
Yeah.
My life is a lot more nice as a business owner than as an employee. Like just, the little things, right? And I'm not saying it's terrible. It would be terrible to be an employee, but it would be pretty jarring, I feel. Like even like it would be one thing if, okay, this Honeybadger thing isn't working out. I got to go back and get like a job. Okay, that's fine. But it's like then to be in your own company and be an employee and sort of have to be like, yes, sir, right away, sir. That just feels weird to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've talked to people who have gone through this process and who have stayed through their entire vesting schedule. And by and large, what the advice that I got back was like, just get the right acquirer. Because like, if you get the right person who's going to buy your business, then you'll be happy to work with them for that time.
Yeah.
And, you may not want to stick around, one day past that cliff, that vesting schedule. But if you find the right acquirer who has the right vision that lines up with what you've been doing, then it'll be an enjoyable time, even if you aren't the boss anymore.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's a strike against a lot of, I think, probably cash flow buyers, maybe. Because if you're hired by, like if you get acquired by a big company and they really want you to sort of do some exciting work for them and I don't know, like do this big strategic thing, like that's one thing. But if you get acquired by somebody and they're like, all right, we got to cut costs now and raise prices and increase in efficiency of everybody across the board. Like that's going to be a whole different experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And so you'd want to have more cash up front in that case. You probably want to negotiate a departure time of like 1 month. Like, oh, you want to cut costs? Well, then you don't have to pay my salary anymore. I'll just take my money and run.
I don't know. My wife's company just got acquired. She works for Tableau. They just got acquired by Salesforce for like $15 billion.
Not too shabby.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah, so
I'd take that deal for Honeybadger.
Josh, would you sell for $15 billion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd sell for $3 billion even. $1 billion each is pretty good still.
That's a pretty good split. I like that.
Even there, like Tableau is not a distressed asset. Tableau was growing like crazy. They were bought by Salesforce for explicitly strategic reasons, because Salesforce is trying to, I guess, compete with GitHub in the analytics, sort of business analytics market. So, I mean, Tableau is going to be fine, but even just seeing like the amount of uncertainty and stress that sort of brings on to the employees is just, I don't know, it's a lot. It's like there's a lot of attention given to the monetary aspects of an acquisition, but the sort of human aspects are something that people don't really think about that much. Like, didn't you say, Josh, one time that actually I read this too. There was a book by one of the Tropical MBA guys called
Before the Exit. Yeah, Before the Exit.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's basically kind of it's a really interesting book, because it's like, okay, everybody thinks that you should be leading up to an exit, and an exit can be fine. Selling your company can be fine, but it's not, 100% beautiful, fun times all the way. So here's reasons maybe you should reconsider selling your company. And it goes through a lot of the things we've sort of talked about here, plus, a bunch more, because it's an actual book. Yeah, sort of. And I think it focuses a lot on this sort of transition, sort of seeing this thing you've built become sort of like seeing your baby become somebody else's baby.
There's kind of like a grieving process that they said that most founders will go through if they sell the thing that they built and loved and all that. Like, and you're not guaranteed to be happy after the sale either. So it depends on a lot of factors. So even if you get that high number that you're looking for, you're not necessarily going to be happy, because then you just have a bunch of cash, but you don't have, cash is a lot different than having an actual cash generating business. You still have to find something to, yeah.
A lot of people look to their businesses to, for purpose and for connection to people. And I can imagine having that just kind of taken away from you would be difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were at MicroConf, and there was a presentation about how entrepreneurs look at their businesses, how they feel about their businesses. And there was like this study, they sat down these entrepreneurs and they gave them pictures of things like, a car or a boat or whatever to measure their emotional response. And when they showed them a picture of their company's logo, it had the same kind of response in their brain as when they looked at pictures of their own children.
Really?
Yeah. So like, because they had these probes on their brain and stuff, and so they measured like the brain activity, and like, the car would be like whatever, and the plane whatever. But when they saw a picture of their baby, or they saw a picture of their business, it's basically the same as their baby.
I mean, it fits. Like, my daughter's basically a little like Honeybadger. She just like jumps off of everything and climbs on everything. And oh my God, yesterday she literally punched out a window pane.
Wow.
Like, I brought her
Nice.
in, and she really wanted to be outside, like playing on all the construction equipment, which I let her do for a little while. And I brought her in, and she was so mad. She was like, oh, and she hit the door, and it's one of those doors that's just sort of like, it's an old fashioned door. It's all sort of single pane glass panels. And she just like put her fist just straight through it. So she's kind of like a little Honeybadger.
Yeah.
So I had a friend do that in high school, except instead of punching it, he kicked it. And instead of it being, an old fashioned glass plane, it was a security reinforced door. And so it had all that wire going through the glass.
Ooh.
And so it ended up in the hospital.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, she's like only 3, so she's got a lot of time to train and
bulk up,
prepare
yeah.
for before high school. I think we can get her there though.
So maybe, one of the things that you can do to prepare for that acquisition, knowing that you might be looking at your business like it's your baby, is develop a healthy sense of detachment, right? Like, all parents have to go through this transition period like I'm going through right now, where their children are going to leave the nest. They're going to go on, do their own thing and live their own lives, right? So maybe part of being an astute business founder who is looking forward to someday I might want to sell this business is, okay, I have to have a healthy sense of separation between me and this business.
Yeah. Or maybe you just have a ton of businesses, and then you spread your emotional whatever, across them. So
So you're saying that people who have like 8 kids don't mind as much when one of them leaves? Like,
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So you just have a ton of businesses.
I can't get behind this. Like, I don't want to become a cold, emotionless capitalist like you guys.
You want to have like the Honeybadger can be like our only child, and I mean, don't you guys think that Honeybadger needs a friend?
I think Honeybadger needs a little sister. We need to bring a new bundle of joy into the world.
Yeah.
Oh man.
One thing I've been thinking about is just like the distressed asset thing, and also we talked about how like money, like revenue, like if say like GitHub acquiring a small like bootstrap like our size, or somewhere around our size, say like Dependabot or something. Do they actually care about revenue? Like, because we kind of, with one of our talks, we ran into a weird situation where it was like, we're a profitable company, we're small but profitable, and we have revenue, we have customers. They didn't seem very interested in that aspect of the business. And so I just wonder, like how much do they actually care? Like, a company that size, how much does it actually care about the revenue versus like, just like we said, the convenience factor of like, you have something that would make our lives easier. We have a ton of money. Like, we don't care about your, relatively small annual revenues.
I would guess they probably don't care that much. Probably a lot of these companies that get acqui-hired don't have much revenue to begin with.
Yeah.
It seems to be just like anything else. It's like companies are bought for a reason, right? Just like anything else you buy it to do something. You buy it for a reason. And maybe that reason involves adding a cash flow asset to your portfolio. Maybe that reason involves hiring some cool people, and it's a reasonable price you're willing to pay. So I don't know. Like I can't imagine GitHub really cared that much about Dependabot's revenue.
Yeah.
They probably cared more about maybe its user base, maybe it's the fact they had a product already working.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's interesting in the GitHub case if you compare the Dependabot and the Pool Pandas acquisitions, especially considering their rapidity in succession, to Gymnasium and what happened there. Because I remember sitting, I think it was GitHub Universe, where they announced their feature that basically tanked Gymnasium's business. And there was some ill will there for sure. I don't know if they really suffered GitHub, if GitHub suffered much as a result. But I mean, there were people who were like, "Oh, that's kind of stinky," I mean, Apple does this all the time, right? There's a phrase for it. It's called being Sherlocked, because Apple built Spotlight into the operating system and then completely eliminated the need for Sherlock, which was a for sale add-on that did basically the same thing. So in the Apple world, they're used to this. Like Apple does this periodically. They release features that then kill one of the providers in the marketplace. But in the open source world and developer world, this hadn't happened a whole lot. And so when basically GitHub Sherlocked Gymnasium, there was a little bit of like, oh, that's not so nice. And so I wonder if some of the motivation behind the acquisition for Dependabot and Pool Pandas was goodwill. Like, I think Microsoft is going above and beyond, trying to make sure that people don't feel like Microsoft is coming in here and ruining the party, right? That Microsoft is playing nice. And I wonder if some of that acquisition is also like, we want this feature. GitHub's like, we want to build that. We want to have that Dependabot feature. We want to have that pull reminder feature, but let's be nice and let's acquire those teams that are building that and integrate it rather than just doing it ourselves.
That's interesting. Yeah. And also they just happen to have a ton more money to do it now with. So it's like, why not? Like, yeah.
Totally.
If you can get the goodwill and it's really not that much.
Yeah. That's a good point.
It seems like the key to, I don't know, like if you have a company and you're thinking about getting acquired, or somebody's interested in acquiring you, like the key thing you have to figure out is like why. Like what? I mean, it could be several reasons. It could be they want your IT, they want to have goodwill with the developer community, whatever. But yeah, it seems like you have to really figure that out so you can figure out what they're willing to pay, so you can negotiate with them. Because if you think that they're looking for some sort of strategic thing and really they just want an acqui-hire, well, that's you're just going to waste everybody's time because you're going to be thinking about two different prices.
Yeah, and I get I've had the feeling, at least dealing with some of our experiences and also just hearing some experiences from other people, like I feel like some of these companies kind of like that do a lot of this type of either acqui-hiring or like buying distressed assets or that sort of thing. Like they kind of look at it like the teams really want to sell, like they're looking for an out or something. At least I've had that feeling before. It's like they're not expecting you to like be in this for the long haul or to have like a profitable business that you're happy with, and does that make sense?
Well, yeah, that brings up the concept of a BATNA, right? What's your best alternative negotiated agreement?
Yeah.
Right. If you have a successful business that's making a bunch of revenue and you're happy running it, well, then your best alternative is keep running the business. Like you're happy. But if your best alternative is, well, I've got to go file for unemployment because I'm about to go under, right? Well, then you're in a kind of weaker position.
In which case, like getting a job at like Microsoft is a pretty good, or wherever,
right.
Usually these acquiring companies, like getting a job there. I mean, that's a good job, too.
Yeah.
But, at least for me personally, like I wouldn't be looking for a job there in the first place. So that's not, a pro to me. Like
Honeybadger is in kind of a weird spot. Like companies in our spot I feel like, I mean, we're not trying to get acquired, but I feel like companies in our spot have a harder time getting acquired, or it just doesn't happen as much because, right, our revenue is too high for some sort of individual investor to just be like, hey, unless they're rich, to just buy us and run us. Like some people, they start a web application, it makes I don't know, $30,000 a year. So you can sell that for $50,000 or whatever to somebody, and they'll run it for you, or they'll run it for themselves. Our revenue is too high for that. But our revenue isn't really high enough and we're not like on this rocket ship trajectory where some company is going to buy us like some bigger company is going to buy us at a larger multiple, just because like, it doesn't really move their bottom line that much, So yeah, so it's not to say that nobody's interested in companies like this, but it's just kind of like this whole topic is just really a little bit more complex than you might think just going into it.
Well, I mean, we're making it kind of difficult for them by being so awesome and content. So, I mean, that's
true. Yeah, if we were desperate, it'd be easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, they could play on our insecurities more.
But in any case, like I think like going through these talks with people has like resulted in us thinking about how, like, back to the like run the business like you're going to sell it someday. Like it has like made us think more about that, and it's resulted in some positive changes. Just for us, like it's nice to own a business that is more automated and runs itself better, because like it gives, it's just healthier. I mean, you're the owner, so it's healthier for you, just as it would be healthier. Like that's why someone wants it to be that way when they buy it, because they don't want something that they're stuck to. So like, why would we want that?
It's kind of both really annoying and also somewhat useful in that like when you're in acquisition talks, everything stops, right? Everything just like you're not really doing any work because you're just thinking about this stuff.
That's the worst part.
You're trying to figure it out. And and so for a week or two or whatever, you're just kind of like in this weird limbo, which really sucks. But then also it's like everybody is kind of thinking about the big picture things, and everybody's thinking about what they want. And so you do kind of come out of it with a little bit more clarity, in terms of like what are things worth to you? Like, what's the company worth to you?
Yeah.
Like, what's your time worth to you? If I had to go and work for somebody, how much is it going to take me to do that? Like, is there any amount? Like,
or what happens after you go and work for someone, and then you're not going to stay there forever. Like, are you starting from ground zero after that? Like, sure, you have some cash in your pocket and you can still start, but starting is still hard. And if you're not just like, if it's not enough to just, to basically like, you don't have to go get a job or start something else. That's one thing. But if it's not quite enough and you still have to like, fill in some income in the future, then I think it's something to really think about. Like, do I actually want to start from zero? And because I don't know about you guys, I forget how hard it was to get this thing to where it is now. And that's a good another 5+ years at least of pretty hard work, and that's if it actually goes.
Yeah, that's the back to how your business is like a baby thing, right?
Yeah.
You forget the early days, how hard it is, right? In the early days. Yeah, even if you do have enough money to ride off into the sunset, even if you don't have to worry about income, like if you don't have any purpose, like, if the business is your purpose in life, you sell it and you end up walking away from it, then what? Right? You got to think about that. Like, that could be pretty disruptive to your life.
All right, so what we're trying to say is we've sold the business.
Announcing
we're shutting down tomorrow. We're joining Microsoft. Peace.
It's been a great journey.
I will say, if you have a business and you are in that position, if someone's interested, go read that book Before the Exit, because we did that last time, and it really was it really got me thinking about a lot of things that I think that you don't want to you want to think about before you actually decide if it's for you or if it's not.
Yeah, that was a good book.
Yeah. Yeah, and selling your company doesn't mean you've won. Just like selling your car doesn't mean you've won. You can get a really bad deal if you sell your company without really considering it. Like things can work out badly, or things can work out goodly. It just, it just depends on doing it right. But it's those feelings, like it's totally natural to have those sort of like giddy feelings. Like, oh my God, this is finally happening. Like the world is going to see like what a genius I actually am. They're going to love me for my true self.
Yeah. There's the ego side to that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. You just I think you just have to kind of wait that out. Just give it a little time to tamp down a little bit, because it's not going to be like anybody who's feeding that, anybody who's trying to get you to feel that is trying to do that so that they will get the upper hand over you in a negotiation.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. Any sort of like this whole congratulatory rhetoric, like that's all bullshit to get you to sell for less money.
You up.
So you got to just step back, be a hard ass, and
or sometimes the boring path is the better, the path best chosen.
Yeah, that's true.
But if you do sell your company, please don't write the blog post about how it was a wonderful journey. Like, just say, hey, we're taking the money, we're running.
Just title peace, or TLDR, peace.
Right. Peace out. Screw you guys. There's no data export. You can't export your data. Sorry.
FounderQuest is a weekly podcast by the founders of Honeybadger. Zero instrumentation, 360-degree coverage of errors, outages, and service degradations for your web apps. If you have a web app, you need it. Available at honeybadger.io. Want more from the founders? Go to FounderQuestPodcast.com. That's one word. You can access our huge back catalog or sign up for our newsletter to get exclusive VIP content. FounderQuest is available on iTunes, Spotify, and other purveyors of fine podcasts. We'll see you next week.